Hi, I'm John Melville from Vernier Software and Technology. I'm going to show you how to record an EMG. An EMG is the electrical activity from a muscle. One of the things that we need to do, though, if you're going to record an EMG, is we need to make sure that we don't have other devices that are going to interfere with the recording. Things that can interfere with this type of recording are things that generate electric noise, like a cell phone or even the power supply to a computer. So I'm going to disconnect the power supply to my computer. We're going to be using the EKG sensor. Now, the EKG sensor is normally used to record the electrical activity from the heart. Now, the heart is a muscle. You have lots of other muscles in your body, and they are also all electrically active. We're also going to be using this hand dynamometer. The hand dynamometer is going to be used to measure the amount of force that's generated by my hand or my forearm. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set up the electrodes on my forearm for recording an EMG. So I'm going to take these electrode tabs and I'm going to place them across the body of the muscle. So since we're looking at the forearm, I'm going to place one here and another one here. So I'm going to be looking at the electrical activity of this muscle, the forearm muscle. So when I squeeze the hand dynamometer, you can see that that muscle contracts. So I'll be looking at the amount of force that I can generate with my hand and the amount of electrical activity that's generated by this muscle. I also need a ground, so I'm going to actually place the ground, I'll just place it over here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take the EKG sensor and apply the leads. Now in this case, it's important to understand that the green lead and the red lead are what I'm using to record from. The black lead is actually used as what we just call a ground. And it doesn't matter what order they go in. You just need to remember that you need to use the red and green lead to record the muscle activity. So I'm going to take the red lead and put it here, the green lead and put it here, and the black lead here is just the ground. And I'm going to place that back over here. Then I'm going to get these out of my way a little bit, like that. The other thing that I'm going to do is I need to plug the sensor into the LabQuest Mini. This is the LabQuest Mini or interface. I'm going to unwrap this wire, because normally if you're recording from an EKG, it's important that this little box also doesn't get any interference from electronic noise. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move that little EKG sensor over here, away from the monitor. You could also put it in your pocket, but I'm just going to move it over here. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in my hand dynamometer. So now I'm ready to start this experiment. If you're using Logger Pro, you can just open an experiment file. So this experiment is actually part of our Human Physiology lab book. So if you actually go to the File drop-down menu and select Open, it will take you to the Experiments folder. If you go down to Human Physiology with Vernier, you can just choose any of our EMG activities. In this case, I'm looking at Lab 18, EMG and muscle fatigue. And I'm going to open that file. And you can see that Logger Pro resets itself. I have grip strength up top in this graph. I'm going to have EMG activity down in this graph. And now I'm really just ready to start the experiment. All that I have to do is zero the hand dynamometer and then just hit the collect button. Now to zero the hand dynamometer, that's quite simple. I just need to go to this button right here, which is next to the data collection button. This is just setting the 0 point for the hand dynamometer. And then I can choose which one do I want to use. And I'm just going to zero the hand dynamometer. You could zero the EKG if you wanted to as well, but it's not critical. What you're about to see is you're about to see force being generated from the hand dynamometer and then the electrical activity from my muscle. So I'm going to show that to you and then I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what that means and then how we can actually analyze it. And this file is going to record for around 100 seconds. We really don't need to record that long to analyze this data, so I'm going to change the duration of this experiment here by clicking on the data collection button, and I'm just going to record for 20 seconds. So now I'm going to hit collect. I'm going to just not do anything for 2 seconds, and then I'm going to squeeze this hand dynamometer hard, and then I'm going to keep on squeezing it, and hopefully we'll see some fatigue. So here we go, collect. Now I'm going to squeeze. Keep squeezing. Oh boy. So now I'm going to put this down. Now what you can see in this file is that force went up, and then it stabilized, and then it began to go down, and then I squeezed a little bit harder here, and the force continued to go down. If you look now at the EMG trace, just take a look at what we call the envelope of this EMG activity. So each one of these spikes that you see here is activity from my brain telling my muscle to be active. My muscles are electrically active, so the more spikes we see here, the more muscle activity there is, or the more electrically active the muscle is. And what you can see is the envelope of this activity is increasing even though the strength is actually decreasing as a function of time. What that means is that my brain is driving my muscle harder and harder, but something's happening peripherally in the muscle to actually make it weaker. If you're teaching human anatomy and physiology, what's happening is that the calcium is getting sequestered and I'm using up all my ATP. And that's actually a process that we call muscle fatigue. So there's a couple different ways that you can actually analyze fatigue in LoggerPro. There's a couple other really interesting and neat things you can show your students using an EKG sensor and a hand dynamometer. So what I would like to do next is just show you how to overlay two graphs. Because what you can show is that the muscle is electrically active before any force is generated by the hand. But you have to do a special thing, and that's called using a double axis on your graph. The simplest way to do that is to take this graph, and I'm just going to scroll it down here, and then I'm going to double click on the graph. If I double click on the graph, you will see this graph options dialog. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the axis options tab. So I'm just going to select here on axis options. Now what you see is this is all of the choices that I have for the y-axis of my graph. Right now it shows force, but if I select over here on this little button called the right y-axis, I can actually have two axes on my graph. I can have one displayed on the left and one displayed on the right. So I'm going to do that. And remember, what I want to show in this case is I want to see force and muscle activity at the same time. So I'm going to select potential, which is in this case is muscle activity. If I then hit done, now if you look at the graph, if you look right here, I have force here and potential here on this side. But you see my muscle activity down here looks really small. That's because I just haven't auto-scaled this graph. If I auto-scale this graph, I'll be able to see both axes maximized on the graph. So I'm going to go right over here to auto-scale. There. So now what you should be able to see is force increases, and then here's this wave of muscle activity. And you can really see it really nicely now that this envelope gets bigger and bigger and bigger, even though my grip strength is decreasing over time. Now, if you want to show your students that the muscle is definitely electrically active before force generation, we can once again just zoom in on a given region. So let's zoom in right here on this area and take a look at the EMG and force. So I'm going to zoom in just on this area right here in the graph. And once again, I'm going to use the zoom in button, which is right here. So what you can see in this case, I'm just going to point this out really quick. Here's force in the red, and then it begins to go up right here. So we can see that force begins to be generated right around here. And what you can see right here in this blue trace is the muscle is definitely active. It begins to be active if we just go down here right before force is being generated. So the muscle in this case is active before force is generated. So for more information on this activity, which is Lab 18, EMG and muscle activity in our Human Physiology with Vernier book, just check out our website, www.vernier.com.